When I left for Afghanistan 3 years ago, the last thing I saw before boarding that transport was a picture on my phone, the lake glimmering behind my grandfather's old cedar dock. That was home. That was what kept me sane through dust storms, firefights, and nights when the world felt upside down. So when I finally drove back down Oak Hollow Road, my hands gripping the steering wheel tight, I expected the same crooked mailbox, the same dirt driveway leading to the cabin my grandfather built with his bare hands. Instead, I hit a wall, not metaphorically, but a brand new 12-foot-tall electronic gate. I slowed, thinking maybe I'd taken a wrong turn. The stone pillars were fake, poured concrete painted to look fancy. Cameras pointed at me from both sides, blinking red like I was trespassing on my own land. A metal sign read, "Private Community Access. Members only. Annual dues required." For a second, I laughed. Thought maybe it was a joke, a prank by one of my neighbors. But then I saw the new blacktop, the keypad entry, and a laminated notice taped beside it, "Property managed by Lakeside Estates, HOA. Unauthorized entry subject to prosecution." My heart sank. I didn't remember joining any HOA, and I sure as hell didn't authorize one. "Been gone a while, haven't you?" he said. 3 years. "Why? What's going on here?" My jaw clenched. "She's locking me out of my own property?" He shrugged, helpless. "Everybody pays now or they don't get through. Even old Mr. Jensen down the road, she towed his pontoon boat last summer. Said he hadn't paid his dues." That's when the pit in my stomach turned into fire. I pulled out my deed from the glove compartment, the same one my grandfather handed me before I deployed. His pencil marks still circled the property lines, showing the lake access easement we'd owned since 1987. No mention of an HOA. No restrictions. Nothing. Someone had taken what wasn't theirs, not just land, but legacy. I parked on the shoulder, grabbed my pack, and started walking the half-mile down to the lake. I passed cameras, warning signs, and perfectly trimmed hedges that had never been there before. Every step felt heavier. When I reached the bend overlooking the water, I stopped cold. The old wooden dock was gone, replaced with a polished aluminum one marked PRIV, a TEMEMBERSONLY. My grandfather's handmade Hayes landing sign had been ripped off. In its place, a new one hung from a chain. Lakeside Estates, marina access by permit only. That was the moment I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a takeover. And whoever Deirdre was, she just declared war on the wrong guy. Long before there were gates, asphalt, and fancy HOA signs, there was just the lake still quiet and stubbornly wild. My grandfather used to say, "Land remembers the hands that worked it." And if that's true, then every inch of this soil carries our family's fingerprints. He bought the property in 1964, back when the town still called it Marsh Hollow. It was nothing more than a patch of overgrown oak, stubborn roots, and a narrow path down to the water. Most folks said it wasn't worth a dime. But he saw something else, a future. He and my grandmother cleared the brush themselves, sleeping in a canvas tent through the first winter. He built the cabin from reclaimed timber and river stones, one nail at a time. The dock came later, after my father was born. Every board cut by hand, every post driven with sweat and pride. That dock wasn't just wood. It was where 3 generations learned to fish, where we watched fireworks on the 4th of July, where I scattered my dad's ashes the year before I enlisted. When I was little, Grandpa used to make me carry buckets of nails and tools while he worked. I remember asking why he didn't just hire someone. He looked at me and said, "Because when you build something with your own hands, it becomes part of you. You don't just own the land owns a piece of you back." That lesson stuck. So when I came home from deployment, When I stood in front of that cold metal gate and saw strangers' rules plastered across what used to be ours, it didn't just feel like trespassing, it felt like betrayal. My family bled for this land. My father took out loans to keep it when times were tough. My mother worked double shifts at the diner just to pay the taxes. We never once missed a payment. Never once thought someone could walk in and just take it away with a few papers and a keypad. That night, I sat in my truck, watching the lake from the road. The moon hit the water, the same way it did when I was a kid, but everything else felt wrong. Behind that fence was my childhood, my memories, my father's final resting place. And beyond the surface beauty, the manicured lawns, the fancy new docks, I saw what it really was: control. Somebody, somewhere, had decided this land wasn't ours anymore. But I wasn't going to let my family story end with a lock and a keypad. What they didn't know was that I wasn't some guy they could bully into paying dues. I wasn't just a name on a dusty deed. I was a veteran, a landowner, and the grandson of the man who carved this place out of the earth with his bare hands. And if they wanted a fight, they were about to get one. 2 mornings later, I returned with a folder full of documents, my property deed, tax receipts, and a copy of the original plat map signed by the county clerk. I wasn't there to argue. I just wanted access to what was already mine. When I reached the gate, a silver SUV pulled up from the inside. The window rolled down, and that's when I saw her Karen Deirdre, the name I'd heard from the mail carrier. Perfectly styled blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, and a clipboard balanced on her lap like it was a weapon. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone dripping with a kind of politeness that hides barbed wire underneath. "Yeah," I said. "Name's Garrett Hayes. This is my property lot, 14B Hayes Landing. I'm just trying to get through to my cabin." She tilted her head slightly, like she was analyzing a suspect. "I'm sorry, but all property owners must be verified members of the Lakeside Estates, HOA. Do you have your access card?" I held up my deed instead. "Got something better. County certified. Been in my family since the 60s. Her smile didn't move an inch. "That may be so, Mr. Hayes, but according to our community charter, all access roads are now under HOA jurisdiction. Without current dues and approval, we can't allow entry." I blinked. "You're telling me I have to pay you to walk onto my own property?" She gave a little laugh, the kind people give when they think you're naive. "It's not me, Mr. Hayes. It's the board. We voted last spring to incorporate private maintenance fees. If you'd like, I can send you an invoice." My voice tightened. "You can send me whatever you want. I'm not paying for something I already own." Her eyes flicked toward the security camera mounted above us. "Then I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave before I call security." I took a slow breath, reminding myself that anger wouldn't help, not yet. "Ma'am, I served overseas. I've been shot at, I've lost friends, and I've been away from this land for 3 years. The only thing I thought about over there was coming home to this lake. You don't have the right to take that away." Her smile vanished for the first time. "You're welcome to appeal the decision at our next HOA meeting. It's open to members only, but we occasionally allow guests provided they submit a request in writing." She handed me a glossy brochure like she was doing me a favor. On the front was a photo of the Lake My Lake with the words Lakeside Estates, a private luxury community. Before I could respond, the gate buzzed open and she drove through, leaving me standing in the dust. I looked down at the brochure, then at my grandfather's name on the old deed. The contrast made me sick. That night, I made a few calls to the county clerk's office, to a friend who worked in real estate law, and to an old Army buddy who'd done contract work for land development firms. The picture that started to form was worse than I thought. It turned out this HOA had been created barely 2 years ago a private association filed by a small group of lakefront owners, led by none other than Deirdre Karen Thompson, who'd conveniently renamed herself Karen Deirdre after a divorce. They'd merged several parcels into a community and quietly claimed control of the main access road, including mine. They didn't own the road. They just assumed nobody would fight them. Well, they'd assumed wrong. The first thing I noticed was the date on the Lakeside Estates Incorporation papers, barely 2 years old. Filed quietly in the county office, buried under dozens of zoning amendments no one ever reads. The paperwork listed 5 founding members, all from the newer lakefront homes. But the signature at the bottom? Deirdre K. Thompson, not Deirdre Karen. She hadn't even bothered to change her name legally before filing. I cross-checked the parcel numbers on my deed against the ones in their community map. That's when my stomach turned. They had redrawn the lines. Except there was one problem. You can't just take land by redrawing it on a map. That's not how the law works. I called the county clerk's office and got transferred to a clerk named Mrs. Halley, who'd worked there for decades. Her voice was sharp but kind, the way small town folks get when they've seen everything. She sighed. It happens more than you'd think. HOAs file proposed boundaries with the county for assessment purposes. Most of the time, nobody objects, so it just stays in the system. Unless someone like you shows up with proof. Proof I had plenty. My deed, my tax payments, even my grandfather's notarized purchase agreement. But I needed something stronger. That's when my friend Derek, the army buddy, who now worked in real estate development, called back. Garrett, I pulled the filings you sent. You're gonna love this. They used a forged signature on the road access easement. I sat up straight. Forged, as in, yeah, someone copied an old signature from a 1998 maintenance contract and pasted it onto the new HOA road document. Whoever did it wasn't even subtle. The font size doesn't match. I felt a slow, cold anger rising. This wasn't just overreach. It was fraud. Can you send me everything you found? Already did, he said. And Garrett, you might want to lawyer up. These people are dirty. Looks like they've been charging other owners for lakefront improvement fees that don't even exist. When I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time, staring at the lake through my window. The same lake my father taught me to fish on. The same one they'd stolen piece by piece with paperwork and arrogance. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about power and pride. I printed every document I had, clipped them neatly into a binder, and labeled it in black marker, HAYESV. LAKESIDEEST, a TESHOA. They had drawn their line in the sand with a gate. Now it was my turn to draw mine in court. The HOA held their monthly meeting in the Lakeside Clubhouse, a glass-walled, over-decorated building that looked more like a country club than a neighborhood center. I parked my truck right out front, binder in hand, heart pounding steady. Inside, a half-dozen residents sat in folding chairs, sipping coffee. At the head of the room sat the familiar face of Karen Deirdre, framed by 2 men in collared shirts, who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. A banner behind them read, Lakeside Estates, HOA, preserving our community. Preserving. That word burned like acid. When I walked in, conversation died. Every head turned. Deirdre's smile froze halfway across her face. Mr. Hayes, she said coolly, this is a members-only meeting. Good, I said, setting the binder on the table. Then maybe the members should know what their president's been doing behind their backs. A murmur spread through the room. One of the board members, a tall man with silver hair, spoke up. And you are? Garrett Hayes, property owner. Lot 14B. My family's had land here since before most of these houses existed. Deirdre folded her hands. "Mr. Hayes, if this is about your dues—" "It's not about dues," I interrupted. "It's about fraud." That word hung in the air. I opened the binder and spread the documents across the table like a dealer laying out cards. "According to county records," I said, "my property was reclassified as a common area without my knowledge or consent. Your charter map includes my land illegally. And this," I flipped to a page, "is a copy of the easement agreement you filed to justify locking me out." I pointed to the signature line. "That's my father's name. He's been dead for 11 years. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Deirdre's face went pale, then flushed red. That must be an administrative error," she stammered. "An error?" I shot back. "Then explain why the signature came from a 1998 contract scanned into your filing system. Or why the road maintenance fund you collect doesn't appear on a single county ledger." The silver-haired man cleared his throat. "Karen, is that true?" Deirdre fumbled with her clipboard. We were told by the previous treasurer." I leaned forward. "You weren't told anything. You forged it. You annexed properties that never agreed to join, and you've been charging people for access to their own driveways." The room erupted in whispers. A woman near the back stood up. "Wait, are you saying our fees aren't even real?" "I have every right," I said, holding up my deed. "And I've already filed a formal complaint with the county assessor's office and the district attorney. They'll be reviewing your filings by next week." Silence. Just the hum of the ceiling fan and the sound of someone shifting uncomfortably in their chair. Then, quietly, the silver-haired man stood. "I move to suspend all HOA operations pending investigation." Another man raised his hand. Seconded. The motion passed before Deirdre could even speak. She tried to protest, but her voice broke under the weight of the murmurs turning against her. The empire she'd built on arrogance was crumbling one truth at a time. I gathered my papers, turned to leave, and paused at the door. "You wanted control, Karen," I said, my voice low but clear. "But this land doesn't belong to you." It never did. But I knew it wasn't over yet. Because people like her don't quit quietly. For about a week after the meeting, things were quiet, too quiet. The gate stayed open, the cameras stopped blinking red, and neighbors I'd never met before waved when I drove by. It felt like the storm had passed. But people like Karen Deirdre don't fade away that easily. They regroup. They find another weapon. It started with a letter taped to my truck windshield. NOTICEOFTRESPASS. Unauthorized presence on HOA property will result in legal action. I tore it off, barely finished reading before the second blow came an email from the County Code Enforcement Office. It said there'd been a noise complaint and a report of unauthorized electrical modifications to my cabin. Except I hadn't even plugged in my generator that week. By the third day, 2 inspectors showed up unannounced, clipboards in hand. One of them looked embarrassed. "Sir, we just have to check the panel. Someone filed multiple complaints under your address." I knew exactly who that someone was. After they left and found nothing wrong, I pulled my security footage. There she was, plain as day, standing by the property line at dusk, snapping photos of my cabin from her phone. She wasn't done with me. She was escalating. That's when it hit me. Deirdre wasn't trying to win legally anymore. She was trying to destroy me publicly, ruin my reputation before the county could even finish their review. By noon, her smear campaign had spread like wildfire through the community Facebook page. Post after post twisted the story claiming I was a disgruntled ex-soldier who refused to follow neighborhood rules. She even dug up old pictures from my deployment and used them to paint me as unstable. For a moment, I felt that old, familiar burn of helplessness, The same one you feel when you're being attacked from every angle and can't fight back without looking guilty. But I wasn't the same man who left for war. I'd learned how to fight with precision, not rage. So I documented everything. Every message, every false report, every witness statement. And when she posted one too many lies about my fake ownership claim, I sent her a cease and desist through my attorney. Within days, her tone changed. The bravado cracked. The posts vanished. But then came her final, desperate move. One evening, I came home to find my gate ripped off its hinges, not by wind, not by accident. The screws were neatly pulled out, the bolts loosened. My private property sign lay in the grass, bent. I called the sheriff's office. When the deputy arrived, he took one look at the mess and sighed. "Garrett," he said, "you're not the first one she's tried to bully. We've had 3 other reports this month. But we've got enough now to open an investigation." I handed him a folder of photos, emails, and that forged signature Derek found. "You'll want to add this to the file." He flipped through it, whistled low. "Looks like she picked the wrong guy to mess with." As his cruiser pulled away, I stood there under the porch light, looking out over the lake. The night was quiet again, but this time it didn't feel like peace. It felt like the calm before a reckoning. Because if Karen thought she could twist the truth to keep her crown, she was about to learn what happens when you pick a fight with someone who's got both the law and legacy on his side. 2 weeks after the town meeting, life had gone strangely quiet. The HOA had backed off, at least in public. No late-night phone calls, no random inspections. But that calm had an edge to it, like the silence before a storm. I kept a file on my kitchen counter labeled HOA evidence, just in case. Photos, receipts, witness statements, all of it neatly organized, waiting for the next ambush. And then, one morning, it arrived. A white envelope slid under my door. No return address, just my name in block letters. For a second, I thought it might be another HOA notice or some new complaint. But when I opened it, I realized this wasn't from the HOA. It was from someone inside it. "You didn't hear this from me," the letter began, "but they're planning to take you to court again. This time, it's personal. They want your property gone before the next fiscal meeting, something about redevelopment funding. Be careful who you trust." My hands trembled as I read those words. So it wasn't over. It was a setup, a bigger play. And worse, it meant someone on the inside, someone who'd seen what was happening, was trying to warn me without risking exposure. That single act changed everything. I made a few calls, one to the county clerk's office, another to my friend at the zoning department. Within hours, my suspicions were confirmed. There was a preliminary development plan being circulated for a luxury wellness retreat on my land. The same 87 acres my family had farmed for 3 generations. The same soil my grandfather had called the bones of our legacy. That night, I drove out to the farm. No lights, no noise, just the wind moving through the dry grass. I sat there in the dark, headlights off, staring at the silhouette of the old barn. The land smelled of dust and rain. It didn't look like much, but it had carried my family through wars, recessions, and droughts. And now, a few HOA signatures could wipe it all away. No, not this time. The next morning, I walked into the county courthouse, a manila folder under my arm. I filed a counterclaim not just to block their redevelopment plan, but to expose every underhanded move they'd made to get there. Fraudulent citations, misuse of funds, intimidation, all of it. When the clerk looked up and asked for my occupation, I simply said, "Judge, county level." Her pen froze midair. "You're the judge assigned to the HOA Oversight District?" she whispered. I nodded. That afternoon, word spread through the HOA like wildfire. The very man they'd tried to intimidate, fine, and bankrupt, was the one person with the legal authority to dismantle their operation. The same man they'd called a nuisance in private emails now held the gavel that could decide their future. But I didn't want revenge. What I wanted was accountability. That evening, I called an emergency meeting. This time, no shouting, no threats. Just silence as I laid out everything I'd discovered: the fake complaints, the illegal development plans, the misuse of resident funds. Karen sat across the table, pale as paper, fingers clutching the arms of her chair. "This," I said, holding up the anonymous letter, "wasn't just a warning. It was a reminder that integrity still exists in this community, even when power corrupts it." The room stayed still. You could have heard a pin drop. By the end of that meeting, the HOA board voted to remove Karen as president and dissolve the redevelopment project entirely. It wasn't dramatic. No one shouted. No one clapped. It was quiet justice, the kind that doesn't need applause. As I walked out, the evening light spilled across the street, warm and golden. The same street they'd tried to claim as theirs. The same neighborhood that had forgotten who really owned its peace. That night, I sat back on my porch, sipped my coffee, and thought about that letter, the one that started it all. Whoever sent it never came forward. But they didn't need to. Because sometimes, justice doesn't roar. But me? I wasn't celebrating just yet. Justice isn't about the victory lap. It's about the cleanup that comes after. I spent those days sorting through what the HOA had left behind: piles of outdated records, unpaid invoices, and half-finished projects that had quietly drained our funds. It was like peeling back layers of rot under polished wood. Beneath the fake smiles and rulebook threats, the HOA had been bleeding the neighborhood dry. And everyone had been too afraid or too tired to notice. So I called another meeting. Not mandatory, not formal, just a gathering at the park, by the same lake where our community used to hold summer cookouts before all this chaos began. I expected a few faces, maybe a handful of curious neighbors. But that evening, nearly the entire community showed up. People brought folding chairs, casseroles, and coffee thermoses. Kids ran around with flashlights. It wasn't a hearing. It was a homecoming. How the HOA had turned something meant for unity into control. How the rules that were supposed to protect became weapons. And how every single person there had a right to reclaim their say in what this neighborhood stood for. Then I did something Karen never would have done. I asked for help. From now on, I said, no more closed-door meetings. No more threats over garden fences. Every decision will be open, transparent, and voted on by the people who actually live here. That hit harder than any court victory could. As people packed up their chairs and kids chased fireflies, I looked across the lake at the reflection of the homes our home. The same ones that had nearly been divided by greed, now shining together in the water like pieces of a single story finally made whole. I realized something then. The HOA didn't just fail because of corruption, it failed because people stopped believing their voices mattered. Karen thrived in that silence. And once the silence was broken, her power vanished. Weeks later, I got a letter from the county confirming that my counterclaim had not only shut down the redevelopment plan, but triggered a full audit of the HOA's finances. What they found led to fines, restitution, and a mandate for democratic elections moving forward. It wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about setting things right. Standing on my porch that evening, I looked at the restored gate, the same one Karen had ordered demolished months ago. The wood was new, but I'd left one piece unpainted, just a small strip of the original oak from before the destruction. A reminder of where it all began. That gate wasn't just an entrance to my property. It was a promise to my family, my neighbors, and myself, that no matter how loud the noise gets, truth will always find its way through. Autumn rolled in slow that year. The kind of season that doesn't announce itself with cold winds, but with the quiet hush of change. The leaves began to turn, and with them, so did the mood in lakeside estates. Where there had once been whispers and tension, there was laughter, genuine and easy. You could hear it echoing across the neighborhood, bouncing off fences that were now shared instead of argued over. I'd wake up early, just before dawn, and take a walk down to the end of the gravel road that bordered my property. The mornings were different now. No more notices taped to my gate, no more HOA patrols circling like buzzards. Just the sound of the river, steady and calm. For months, I had lived in fight mode, every breath braced for the next attack. But now, with the war behind me, I could finally see what I'd been protecting all along. It wasn't just land. It was peace. One morning, I stopped by the general store in town. The clerk, a young woman named Ellie, handed me a cup of coffee and said, everyone's talking about how you stood up to the HOA. My dad said it gave people hope that maybe good folks still win sometimes. I smiled, a little embarrassed, and told her I hadn't done it alone. And that was the truth. Justice might have come through my hands, but it had started with a single anonymous letter, a reminder that there's always someone out there willing to do the right thing, even if they can't be seen doing it. After that, I drove out to the lake again, the same lake that had nearly been turned into a playground for the rich, the same one that held 1,000 memories from my childhood. I parked the truck, got out, and just stood there, hands in my pockets, watching the sunlight dance across the water. The air smelled of pine and wet soil. The farm was still standing, strong old barn, new gate and all. It's funny, People think justice is loud courtrooms, gavels, arguments. But real justice doesn't always come with a bang. Sometimes it comes quietly, like the sound of water settling after a storm. I started thinking about Karen. Not out of anger, just curiosity. What drives someone to believe control is the same as respect? I'll never know her reasons, and maybe that's okay. What mattered more was the lesson she left behind, that power without principle will always collapse under its own weight. I walked down to the barn, opened the old doors, and saw the sunlight cut across the floorboards. My grandfather used to say, "Land remembers kindness. It also remembers betrayal." Maybe that's why the soil feels heavier now, like it knows what it survived. When I looked up, I saw something carved into one of the old wooden beams, something I hadn't noticed before. It was faint, but still legible. "Hold your ground." It must have been my father's handwriting. 3 simple words. A message from another time, waiting to be found when I needed it most. I ran my hand across the carving and felt the weight of it, years of sweat, struggle, and resilience pressed into that wood. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. Standing your ground isn't about pride. It's about preservation. Not of things, but of truth, of dignity, of the simple right to live without fear in the place you call home. The HOA saga became a local story for a while. People from nearby towns started showing up, asking how we'd taken back our neighborhood. Some even wanted advice. But I always told them the same thing. It's not about fighting harder. It's about standing smarter. You don't win by shouting the loudest. You win by holding your ground when others expect you to run. By winter, life had settled into something peaceful. The farm was thriving again. The community rebuilt itself from the inside out. We planted a new oak tree near the gate, a symbol of fresh beginnings. Every time I walk past it, I remember the long nights, the courthouse silence, the moment Karen's face went pale when she realized who I was. But more than that, I remember the neighbors who stood beside me, the unseen whistleblower, and the voice of my father whispering through the timber, "Hold your ground." Not by fighting harder, but by refusing to give up. A few days before Christmas, a small envelope showed up in my mailbox. No address, no name, just a wax seal. My pulse quickened. I opened it carefully, half expecting more trouble, but instead there was just a note. You don't know me, but I wanted to say thank you. I was part of the board when things went wrong. I stayed quiet out of fear, but your courage reminded me that silence only feeds corruption. You saved this place more than you know. No signature. Just that. For a long time, I stared at that note. Whoever wrote it didn't need to reveal themselves. The words were enough. It was proof that integrity, real, quiet integrity, can ripple through people long after the noise fades. That evening, I drove through Lakeside Estates. Christmas lights twinkled on nearly every house. Neighbors waved from porches that once turned away in silence. The whole town seemed to glow not from decoration, but from healing. And in that drive, I saw something that nearly broke me. A small wooden sign had been placed by the lake entrance. Hand-carved, painted white, simple yet perfect. It read, Garrett Hayes Community Park in honor of standing your ground. I pulled over, stepped out of the truck, and stood there for a long time, letting the cold air sting my face. The world had a way of circling back, of turning struggle into story, loss into legacy. That's when it hit me. The fight wasn't about land, or rules, or revenge. It was about something every person deserves, the right to belong. The right to live without fear of losing what you've built. People talk about power like it's a weapon. But the real power, the kind that changes things, doesn't come from position or title. It comes from standing firm when everything around you tells you to fold. Karen once believed control made her strong. But what she never understood was that true strength doesn't come from authority, it comes from restraint. From knowing when to push back and when to rise above. As the snow started to fall heavier, I walked back to my truck, feeling the crunch beneath my boots. I looked back one more time at that sign and smiled. Because this time, I wasn't the man fighting for his home. I was the man who had restored one for everyone else. When I got home, I placed the anonymous note next to the old beam from the barn, the one carved with my father's words. 2 reminders, one from the past, one from the present, both saying the same thing in their own way. Hold your ground. I turned off the lights, stepped onto the porch, and let the snow fall in silence. In that stillness, I realized that justice isn't about how loud you can be, it's about how long you can stand. And when you do, the world eventually listens. Because no matter how dark the storm, no matter how heavy the silence, truth always finds its echo. And that echo was home.